Welcome to Atlanta DSA's Socialist Night School. Our topic tonight is what is capitalism? Um, this session will be recorded and posted to our digital library. Any discussion portions will be removed from the video before we post it. We're not going to share your names. We're not going to share your voices. What we'll post is just the panelists portion. So here's a rough overview of what we'll be talking about. We have three panelists. My name is Julie. I'll be going first, and I'll be talking about what capitalism even is. Then Alex will take over and tell us about some of the history of how capitalism came to, I don't know, take over the world, right? And then finally, Chris is going to wrap up with what we can do, including some calls to action, ways you can get involved and help the anti-capitalist fight. All right, next slide, and we'll just pause briefly here before moving on. What is capitalism? All right, next slide. So to get our brains warmed up for the next few minutes, we have a question. And when you feel like you're ready, type your answer into the chat and we'll read it off. What is capitalism in 15 words or less? Capitalism is a system run by private owners with profit as the motivator. The private ownership of all capital and the exploitation of workers. We'll take a couple more. A form of society where a small property owning class exploits the working class majority for profit. We can move on to the next slide. And if anybody was in the middle of typing something, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'd still look at it. Okay, so how does DSA define capitalism? This is from a DSA source. Capitalism is a system designed by the owning class to exploit the rest of us for their own profit. Next slide. Wikipedia defines capitalism as an economic system in which the means of production are privately owned. Okay, so what does means of production mean? Production means the manufacture of goods, the growing of food, the generation of electricity. That is, production means making all the physical, saleable items that human beings can find uses for. You can call these physical items commodities, if you like. The means of production refers to the sum total of all the raw materials, tools, and infrastructure that goes into producing all that useful stuff. The means of production include seeds for apple trees, lithium for batteries, plows for planting the seeds, welding machines for assembling the batteries, and roads for delivering the apples and batteries to the consumers. The raw materials, tools, and infrastructure required to make useful stuff, including the stuff we need to live, those are the means of production. So Eugene Debs, Socialist Party candidate for president, said in 1912 that capitalism is founded upon production for profit. Compare what Debs said with DSA's current platform from the 2021 political platform of DSA. We fight for the abolition of capitalism and the creation of a democratically run economy that provides for people's needs. Debs said, capitalism is founded on production for profit. Socialism is postulated upon production for use. Notice the common thread here. Socialism is based on production for meeting people's needs. Let's give precise definitions of these two terms, production for use and production for profit. And then we're going to do a little activity and see if we can apply these concepts to some real life examples. Okay, so we got three ideas here. And when we move on to the questions, we're going to leave these definitions on the screen. So don't worry about trying to memorize them or anything. Production means production of a commodity, a useful physical item that someone will trade you something of value for. Production for use means production for the sake of meeting a human need directly. Production for profit means production for the purpose of trading it for something of value, like for money, not for immediate use. Okay, so I'm going to put up a slide now that describes an action by a person or a group of people. We'll have a couple of these slides. And I'm going to ask, are we looking at production for profit, or is this production for use? Next slide. Or is it not even production? Okay, so here's an example. I brush my teeth in the morning. That is work, right? It's work to brush your teeth. Is this for profit, or is it for use? What do you think? Production for use, production for profit, or is it not even production? Production for use, someone says? Not production, not even production? Well, okay, let's see. Is brushing my teeth production? Well, am I producing some physical item that someone would trade something of value for? No, right? I'm not making anything. So brushing my teeth is not even production, right? All right, next one. This is another easy one. I think the last one was pretty easy. I mean, I shouldn't say anything's easy because these are all unfamiliar concepts to us. We were educated under capitalism, right? So I grow tomatoes in a garden. What do you think? I grow tomatoes in a garden. Production for use, production for profit, or not even production? For use, for use, for use. Everyone says for use. I agree. I agree. If you're growing tomatoes in a garden, you're not producing like that many tomatoes, right? You're probably going to eat them. Probably going to make a nice tomato sauce with them. All right, next slide. All right, a slightly tougher one. Production of all the food my family will need over the next 5 years to keep them from starving to death. Is it production for use or for production for profit? Everyone says production for use. All right. Well, rhetorical question. Can you personally produce all the food your family needs for the next 5 years to keep them from starving to death? I know I can't. I don't even have a backyard. I'm not growing 5 years worth of food. Yeah, I'm not a homesteader either. Yeah, right. So it seems like production for use because you're thinking it would meet a human need, but can you do it? Can any of us do it? And then the other question is, who can? I mean, corporations can do it, right? Who has the means of production to make all this food? Not us, not working people. All right. All right. Any doubts? Any questions before we move on? I say this is production for profit because we can't make enough food for ourselves under the current system. Would anybody like to throw out an example of their own to try this with for use, for profit, or not even production? By the way, if you're interested in this like modes of production stuff, that little nerd icon means like don't worry about it if you're not a big nerd. But the Mike Duncan podcast, Revolutions, is excellent. And episode 3 of season 10 gives a great breakdown of how Karl Marx decomposes the modes of production into its various elements. All right, let's move on. Revolutions is the name of the podcast by Mike Duncan, probably one of the best podcasters out there. Duncan is like not a Marxist, and he's speaking for a popular audience. It's very fair and balanced on this, though. Really good explanation. Okay, so what is profit? Before I hand off to the next speaker, I want to ask a question that's going to set the stage for the section to follow. What is the difference between producing a surplus and producing a profit? I work at a nonprofit, a public university. When we have a budget surplus, nobody dreams of taking the excess money, putting it in their pocket, and walking away. That would be stealing. Next slide. What is surplus? Surplus just means more than is needed. An economic surplus means that the society has produced more than it needs to keep the society functioning. But when a capitalist takes the surplus, puts it in their pocket, and walks away with it, well, that's just what capitalism is. Surplus means more than we need to keep us all alive and healthy enough to keep working. Okay, this is supposed to be a water tower. I'm not really an artist. You see that there's no water in it. You see that the people are sweaty. They need water. Maybe they build a dam. Maybe they build a reservoir too, and they maintain it. And while we're at it, a purification plant. I mean, who would do all this, right? Who would build the reservoir? Who would work at the plant? Anyway, workers work so that there is enough water so that we all don't dehydrate and keel over at our jobs. But having exactly enough to stay alive, exactly enough, that's a nerve-wracking situation to be in, right? To have no surplus, that's pretty precarious. It sure would be nice to have more than we need. The alternative is living hand to mouth. Okay, so now suppose we have a surplus. Maybe nature blessed us with a much needed rainstorm. Happy faces all around. No one's worried about dehydrating. We have more than enough. We have water to spare. A surplus. Surplus is transformed into profit by the act of putting it in your pocket and walking away. That's the definitional difference between surplus, more than the bare minimum needed, and profit. Profit is for individual gain. Surplus, before anyone walks off with it, starts out, conceptually at least, as a surplus for the community. If someone makes off with all the surplus and leaves the community with the bare minimum needed to keep everyone alive and healthy enough to keep doing labor, well, doesn't that sound like minimum wage, or what minimum wage is supposed to be, at least in theory, enough to keep you alive and working? And if this person is allowed to keep taking the surplus for themselves so that everyone else has to either work or keel over, well, it's enough to get you asking the question, what is to be done? What enables the capitalists to claim the surplus for themselves, no matter what else is happening? You're sick? Your boss still needs to get paid. You need to pay medical bills. Your boss's needs come first. Your kid is sick. Your boss's kids come first. What enables the multimillionaires and billionaires to keep taking record profits, no matter what the consequences are for the rest of us? Nothing but the class consciousness and class solidarity of the capitalist classes, which is expressed politically through the law, property law, labor law, through rhetoric, through ideology, and of course, through law enforcement. All right, that's my section. I'm now going to turn it over to Alex for the history, capitalism's origin story.
Thank you, Julie. What's up, everybody? I'll be talking about the origin of capitalist production as conceived by Marx. In order to understand this origin, we must first trace the historical development of commodity production. So what is a commodity anyway? So here's Marx's big nerdy definition. As you can see, he isn't the most concise writer, but all it essentially means is a commodity is something that you make in order for it to be sold. So here's an overview of the stages of commodity production that we will be going over: simple, handicraft, manufacturing, and factory. Note that with each successive stage, productivity improves. So starting off with stage one, simple commodity production. In this earliest stage, tribes or families collectively manage their own means of production, such as land and tools. They primarily make things for their own collective use, and only extra unneeded goods are sold to other tribes as a commodity. So commodities play very little role in these societies. Productivity at this stage is very limited, as production methods are labor-intensive and time-consuming. Next, we transition to the stage of handicraft production. In this stage, goods are primarily produced for the market as commodities. The producers own their own means of production, and economic organization is primarily based around one or a few individuals. The notable productivity improvement here is the specialization of skills. Artisans could focus on producing one type of good, thereby increasing the quality and quantity of production. Because the artisan was in control of their means of production, they also control their own surplus. However, because artisans didn't accumulate much capital at this stage, as they used most, oh, sorry, let me reword that. So artisans did not accumulate much capital at this stage because most of what they earned was used to buy things they needed to live. So I have a question for everybody. As we see in this stage, artisans owned their own means of production and didn't accumulate capital. However, we know that capitalism is a system where workers are propertyless and capitalists have a large accumulation of capital and own the means of production. So how could capitalism come out of handicraft? Does anyone want to guess how Marx was able to resolve this puzzle? And preferably guess if you're not already super familiar with Marxist theory. Managers? Not sure what do you mean by that. I must say no, not really.
Alex, could you restate the question real quick?
Yeah, so how did capitalism arise out of handicraft if under handicraft the workers owned their own means of production and didn't accumulate capital? How did a situation where you go from workers owning their own means of production to capitalists owning the means of production and workers are propertyless? Is it more specialized tool that costs more to own? Not really. Private property law. I mean, Chris,
Alex, I
you
think
know.
you better tell us.
I mean, Chris, you know what I'm gonna say. So the answer is primitive accumulation. So this question is why it's crucial to understand the process of primitive accumulation before moving on to the next stage of commodity production. Yeah, exactly, Julie. They took it. That's the answer. So this is where the means of production originally begin to be accumulated by the capitalist class, which is why it is called original or primitive accumulation. Through various means such as the enclosure of common lands, colonization, and slavery, individuals are able to amass staggering amounts of wealth and forceful confiscation of the means of production from workers. This wealth is then used to invest in production. This all resulted in the creation of a class of capitalists who control the means of production and another class of workers who depend on a job from capitalists in order to make a living. Primitive accumulation is essentially the historical process that kickstarts capitalism by concentrating wealth and establishing the conditions for capitalist production. So, the next stage, manufacturing. Here, because of primitive accumulation, the capitalist enters the scene with the possession of the means of production, raw materials, and money for wages. Alongside the capitalist is the propertyless worker who needs a job. Instead of being separate and scattered, workers are brought together under one roof. Together, the workers divide the work to create a commodity through their cooperation. This division of labor in the workshop is a key productivity improvement as it allows for greater efficiency. Each worker specializes in only a small part of the production process. Additionally, when production is done on a large scale, the cost and materials needed are reduced significantly. With a much higher productive capacity, commodities are able to be produced at a much higher volume. However, because the capitalist class now controls the means of production and not the individual workers, they're able to appropriate the surplus profits. So notice, it just occurred to me, notice how the workers are now socially cooperating together, but the appropriation is now still going to an individual person. Right? Under handicraft, it was just one worker and it went to that one, and the profits went to that one worker. But under capitalism, it's a lot of workers, but now the profit is going to one capitalist. So lastly, we have the stage of industrial capitalism. The relentless pursuit of reducing labor costs in a capitalist system often motivates the introduction of highly productive labor-saving machinery. The significant productivity improvement here is mechanization. Machinery replaces human labor, enormously increasing the scale and efficiency of production. This is the foundation for the modern capitalist economy with its characteristic large-scale industry and production for mass markets. This introduction of machinery tends to constantly displace labor, resulting in persistent unemployment. Meanwhile, these efficient machines continually churn out goods, contributing to a chronic overproduction of commodities. The inability to sell these products leads to reduced profit for businesses, leading to layoffs and further economic turmoil. This chronic and cyclical pattern illustrates one of the inherent contradictions and instabilities within the capitalist system in its advanced development. So lastly, we come to the rise of the capitalist state. So industrial capitalism and its crises necessitated the rise of a capitalist state. The state becomes an essential actor in protecting and reinforcing the interests of the capitalist class in a society filled with antagonism and turmoil. However, the state has also had to rein in capitalist excesses and make concessions to the working class for the purpose of keeping social order. In this sense, the state positions itself above society and above class antagonisms. Marx, referring to the class struggle in France under Louis Bonaparte, remarks, "Only under Louis Bonaparte does the state seem to have made itself completely independent," unquote. In its attempt to manage crises, the state tries to channel class antagonisms into state institutions. Ultimately, however, the laws, regulations, and institutions of the state are shaped to facilitate capitalist production and accumulation. In order to enforce this order, special armed bodies of the state, such as police and military, are necessary. As Marx says, the struggle seems to be settled in such a way that all classes, equally powerless and equally mute, fall on their knees before the rifle butt. So now for some questions. That's good. Okay, yeah, I think that's it. So I think I'm gonna hand it over to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So yeah, this section is called "What Must Be Done," and it's subtitled "Moving Beyond Capitalism." So you go to the next slide, please. What we've covered so far is what capitalism is and a little bit about why it's bad. I'm sure we can all agree that we're in a terrible mess, and now we need a way to get out of it. So the next slide has some questions that I want you to think about. So first question is, what do we need to do to move away from capitalism? And the second question is, why are these necessary conditions necessary? So let's go to the next slide. So I want to introduce this term necessary conditions to you. So what it means is it's things that need to happen before we can move beyond capitalism. That is, if we don't have these things, we can't move beyond capitalism. We're stuck still. And then, so material conditions, something you've probably heard before. Socialists say that phrase a lot. And doesn't mean intangible things like there's a specter haunting America, there's no ghosts, but we're talking about, it means concrete physical things. And these are in no particular order. Don't come away from this thinking that one is more important than any other, because they're all important. Also, they're necessary, but they're not sufficient. Just having all of these things that I'm going to mention, it's not going to magically take us to a socialist utopia overnight. So yeah, there are other things that we need to do too. So let's dive into some examples here. So first material condition is a way to meet our basic needs without capitalism. So the funny thing about capitalism is it makes products for profit of a select few, which causes a lot of problems. Instead, we should make products that greater society needs and wants. So you see this pyramid I have on the right? This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The idea behind it is that all the things on the pyramid are important if you want to live a happy and psychologically satisfying life. But if you don't have the things on the bottom of the pyramid, you can't get the things on the top of the pyramid. So the blue level on the bottom is labeled physiological needs. This is all the stuff that your body needs to stay alive. And one of the ways that capitalism traps us within that system is by meeting the physiological needs of some working class people, which creates a system of dependence on capitalism, which leads to exploitation. That's why we need a mode of production that meets our basic needs without exploitation, wage slavery, chattel slavery, pollution, and all of these other bad things. We need like the barest necessities: food, water, shelter, space. Just to start with. We're not incentivized to source our food, water, and housing outside of the capitalist supply chain. And if we do try to do that, capitalists usually come in and destroy it, which renders us dependent on capitalism again to meet our physiological needs, which then further continues the cycle. All right, so the next example I want to talk about is stuff we produce without the profit motive. So a common counter argument that capitalists will bring up is, if we didn't have capitalism, market forces, exploitative labor practices, etc., nobody would get any work done. But the truth is, you don't need capitalism to produce stuff. So here are some examples of stuff that's produced without capitalism, without the profit motive at all. So breathable air, trees do a pretty good job of doing that on their own. Like, you don't need to coerce them with the threat of homelessness if they don't make breathable air. In many cases, food literally does grow on trees, and fresh water literally springs forth from the ground and like springs. And we have the whole water cycle. I'm sure we all remember from middle school or high school or whenever you took environmental science, if you took it at all. Problem is, the Nestle Corporation would have something to say about both of those things. I'm sure you've heard they're like trying to own the rain and privatize sources of water so that it all belongs to them. Another example, like the educational materials we make, like this presentation, none of the people who made this got paid for it. We're volunteers. And the next one is free and open source software. There's an entire ecosystem of software developers that make high quality software, and they just give it away. They just put it on the internet and say, hey, everybody, you can download it if you want. And it's usually they do this so they don't have to pay licensing fees for low quality software produced by big companies. I mean, literally the entirety of the internet runs on free and open source software. All of the servers, that's the signal that is coming from my computer broadcasting to you, literally all of them probably run some form of Linux. And when I say probably, I mean definitely. They definitely do. And then the last example here is mutual aid. That's another term you've probably seen a lot if you're in left-leaning spaces. It's associated with that Peter Kropotkin guy because he wrote a book about it, but he didn't come up with the idea. Some French zoologist from the 19th century did. And it basically means anything we do to help people without requiring anything in return. It's a biological drive that most human beings have because we are a social species. We're primates. It's closely related to the concept of mutualism in biology, kind of like, why we have cats or dogs or any other kind of pet. They provide us with companionship, which makes us feel good. And in exchange, we give them a nice place to live. We give them lots of food. We, scratch their backs, give them pets and all that stuff, right? Yeah, we have some mutual aid projects like providing relief for that big train derailment that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, and also providing some materials on safe abortion practices post Roe v. Wade being overturned. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, here we go. Mass education. And this means spreading as much knowledge as possible to as many people as possible. And I'm not just talking about lefty nerd stuff like political theory, but also actual nerd stuff like math and science. Class consciousness is another term you've probably heard before. It means being aware that one is in an economic class that has a specific role to play in capitalism. And also the fact that you can do something about it. And when I say mass education, I'm not just saying stay in school, kids. I mean, yes, stay in school, but I also mean knowledge is power. I'm also going to plug the Atlanta DSA book club. We're reading some interesting stuff. We're not reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but we could. And this is a very good book about how people that are oppressed learn things or how to teach things if you're being oppressed. So let's go to the next slide, please. So yeah, here's a quote from Albert Einstein. Education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned in school. It's obviously a very cynical view of the education system. I get it. Capitalists use educational institutions as a form of social control. They teach you just enough to get a job, but not enough to ask questions and think critically. To quote someone we recently read in book club, Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. This is why I said it's not just stay in school. Education is much more than that. Let's go on to a question I have. So consider the following subjects that you see on the screen. You got biology, evolution, environmental science, queer studies, geography, economics, US history, world history, Greco-Roman art, sex ed, and critical thinking in general. What do these different subjects have in common? So yeah, can we go to the next slide where I have my answer to this question? Yeah, so here it is. Republicans and some Democrats want to heavily censor, or in some cases, impose a complete ban on all of these different subjects. And you can see for yourself, like just reading through the list that I have there. Lots of different things. You got biology, you've got history, you've got critical thinking, which I took that directly from the Texas Republican Party's platform from 2012. They literally said they're against teaching critical thinking. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here's another guy I consider very, very smart, George Carlin. He said, "I'll tell you what meaning the owners of this country, don't want. They don't want a population of well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interests." So this quote explains why capitalists won't teach you those things that I just mentioned. It's because it's against their interests. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is one more thing that we need, going back to like this idea of necessary conditions, solidarity forever. We got to get organized. We all know about unions. We all heard many good things about them, especially recently. Going down the list here to working class culture. This means media. It includes our own independent journalism, literature, if you have the time to write literature, music. This picture, for example, I have here, it's a bunch of stickers I got at the Creature Comforts Union benefit concert. But also leisure, stuff to do. This could be anything from having a group of drinking buddies to a group that rides bikes in the park, or reading books and talking about them. Once again, book club. Yeah, because guess what? That's friendship. That's a social bond that keeps people together. And why is that important? It's because we have strength in numbers. There's more of us than there are of them. That's the big advantage that we have as working people, working class over the owner class, is because there's more of us than there are of them. We should use our big advantage. Okay, next slide, please. So this is, I'm just going to throw this out there to the floor. Can you think of anything else we need to move beyond capitalism, and think about why they're necessary to transform our society? So the stuff I talked about is not an exhaustive list by any means. There are a whole bunch of other things. I talked mostly about education because I'm on the Poly Ed committee. I'm biased. So does anybody have anything else that we need? So I see Nate said stack.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as Alex. So this is a subject for another day, but how do we get the working class to be organized for, as a class and for its own interests, right? We need a class-wide, nationwide, international organizations that can assert the working class's interests in the state, in politics, in broader society, right? And that means building up a independent working class political party, which is DSA's long-term goal. Because of the weirdness of the US electoral system, we're for now running candidates in Democratic primaries and as independents and local elections without trying to get a ballot line for now, but trying to build up DSA as like a party-like organization in practice. And that helps to coordinate all this work happening in mutual aid and education and unions at the national level. So that's very important, and there's a lot of very cool socialist parties around the world doing that in other countries too.
All right, thank you, Nate. We're running very low on time, so I'm just gonna speed through this next section here. So yeah, call to action, striking back. So next slide, yeah, organize your workplace. If you can't join a union, if you don't have a union, you can either join one. There's a Wikipedia link list of trade unions. Go to the section called United States. There you go. That should be a good first start. But if none of those would work for you, you can make your own union and maybe affiliate. So yeah, let's keep going. Next slide, please. If you're not already a member of DSA, join DSA. There's I see Nate posted workerorganizing.org for resources to organize your workplace. Let's go to the next slide. Keep going. Almost out of time. Why DSA, you might ask? Well, it's the largest socialist organization in the US. And here's some cool stuff we've done. So we've got hundreds of elected officials at the state level, local level, and the federal level. So we're a prominent force. Mentioned mutual aid relief in East Palestine, Ohio. We've been raising union support and funds. We've also been doing a lot of abortion campaigning. Yeah, let's keep going to the next. Yeah. Is Atlanta DSA special, specifically our chapter? Well, we are the largest DSA chapter in the South. Here's just some of the stuff we do. The Political Education Committee. We're doing Socialist Night School, the thing we're doing right now. We've been building up a digital library over the past several months now. Book club, the next one is Revolutionary Theory and Sci-Fi and Socialism is coming soon. So yeah, you'll basically find some of those links on the calendar. Sorry about that. Electoral Committee, they've been doing Reproductive Freedom Act stuff. There's the huge Stop Cop City campaign. The Labor Committee, there's the UPS campaign. Delta, like ramp workers are unionizing. Public sector collective bargaining campaign is coming back. It will return soon. And there's also a bunch of other committees that I just could not fit on this slide, and we are basically out of time. So here's some of the links. So yeah, this is all of these links here. We got Atlanta DSA's digital library. Polyed meetings every Thursday at 8 p.m. That is actually right now. That's what we're going to do basically. And honestly, it's more than a committee. We should probably call it our poly education community. Okay. And then that's it. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for coming.